Best friend told my parents that I lost my V card because she was jealous. 2 months ago, I started dating a new guy at our high school. He was the new guy in school and every girl wanted to be with him, including my best friend. Now, before this, my best friend and I had never had any problems between us. She never showed herself to be envious or jealous of me, so I trusted her. And I literally told this girl everything. The new guy started showing me a lot of attention. He followed me on Instagram and DM'd me right away. Apparently, I reminded him of his ex, who he was obsessed with. One morning, my best friend and I are hanging out before class starts. The new guy walks up to us, says good morning to us both, and then asks me if he could talk to me privately. That's when my best friend says, "You can talk in front of me. I'm her best friend and she trusts me." So then he proceeded to ask me out in front of her. The look on her face was terrifying. She was so pissed off. Of course I said yes and he walked away. That's when my best friend said, "Oh my god, he's kind of ugly. Did you smell his breath? It stinks really bad. Why would you ever go out with that guy?" Then she says, "You better not go out with him." Part two. When she said, "You better not go out with him or I'll tell your parents." I looked at her and said, "You wouldn't dare." She's like, "You're right, I wouldn't." By the way, my parents were very strict. They'd never let me go out on dates, much less have a boyfriend. The weekend comes around and I'm getting prepared for my date. So I told my parents that I was going to be with my best friend the entire weekend. And of course, they believe me. I sent her a text message saying, "Hey, I told my parents I'm going to be with you. So if they ask you, you got to cover for me." She says, "Of course I will." I go on the date with the new guy and it was so much fun. For the first time ever, I was treated like a girl. He held my hand, he was kissing my neck, and he paid for everything. Like I said, up until that point, I'd never really had an experience like that. I was falling for him quick. We'd gone to watch a movie and at the movie theater, he started kissing me. Of course, I kissed him back. That's when he asked me if I wanted to go back to his house because his parents weren't home. And I said yes. As we're driving to his house, I was so excited. So I texted her out of excitement telling her that I was going to be going back to his house. She replied and told me that I was a slut and that I was being too easy. She even asked me to send her a picture of what I was wearing, which I did. Then she replied, "You'd look like a slut." Then we got to his house and we started making out again. Part 3 is up. That's when we started doing the dirty in his room. All while my best friend is slut-shaming me. Could hear her messages come in as we're on his bed. I grab my phone and silence it and see that I have about 20 text messages from her. I read the first one and it said, "You better not be effing him right now, or I will tell your parents." But of course I ignored them. I was doing it with this guy. But to be honest, it ended pretty quickly. As I'm getting dressed, he says, "Do you need me to drop you off at your best friend's, or can you stay and have dinner with me?" This boy was trying to cook me dinner. Of course I said yes. I text my best friend and tell her, "Why are you being so mean?" I told her that nothing happened, but she wouldn't believe me. That's when I told her that he was going to make me dinner at his house, and this is when she got even angrier. She said, "Why is he making you dinner? What did you do to have to get that dinner?" I told her nothing and she wouldn't leave me alone. That's when she started calling my phone. Of course I didn't answer. 3 minutes later, I get a call from my mom. I answered right away and pretended to be at my best friend's. And that's when my mom told me that my best friend called her and told her the truth. So I couldn't lie anymore. Took me to my parents' house and they were furious. My parents told this boy that he has to marry me. He literally ran away. I ran out of time. Part 4 will be up soon.
I'm attracted to my father-in-law and I kind of want to hook up with him. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's sending me on Instagram. My husband and I met a little over a year ago. We actually met on vacation and we happened to live in the same city, so we decided to go on a date when we got back. 2 months later, we got engaged. My family was completely against it though. My parents thought it was way too quick for us to get married. But here's the thing, I'm 32 and I was desperate at that point for somebody to just ask me to marry them. And looking back, that was completely wrong of me. My parents were so against it that when they met my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, they told him that we should just date a little bit longer before we even decided to get engaged. But of course, eventually we made the decision on our own and my parents just had to deal with it. By the time we had gotten engaged, I had only met his mom. His dad traveled a lot for work, so he was pretty much never home. So here's a little backstory on my husband. He was born in the same city I was, and his parents had him when they were 14 and 15. They were incredibly young. So his parents were more like his friends. They had so much fun and hung out together. It was always a really good time. We decided to have an engagement party, and that's when I met his dad. And it was infatuation at first sight. Part 2 is I'm attracted to my father-in-law and I kind of want to hook up with him. Disclaimer, is not my story time. It's sending me on Instagram. I decided to start flirting with him a little bit more. I kind of wanted to see what he would say. My parents-in-law invited me and my husband over to their house for barbecue. So I decided to wear a thong bikini. My father-in-law was grilling in the backyard and my mother-in-law was inside making a salad. So of course, I took off all my clothes and I pranced around the pool in my thong bikini. I positioned myself perfectly so that my father-in-law had a great view of my ass. I also went up to him and started talking. I would touch his shoulder every now and then. That's when he said, "If I didn't know any better, I would think that you're flirting with me." Then he smiled. I almost died. I laughed with him too. And then my stupid husband came outside. That was 2 days ago. You guys tell me, but in my opinion, it sounded like he was liking it. For the rest of the barbecue, every time I would turn to look at him, he was always looking at me, so I knew it was working. But now I'm like, what's the goal? Do I really want to ruin my relationship with my husband and ruin his parents' relationship? Or do you think we can keep it on the down low? What should I do?
Story time about how my husband died and his best friend won't leave me alone. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. My husband and I were married for almost a decade. During that time, we had 2 kids. And of course, his passing was completely devastating to our families. And 2 weeks after my husband died, I was still grieving. But his best friend started coming around our house a lot. First, he was very emotional. Him and my husband were best friends for about 7 years. They saw each other almost every day. Not only did they work together, but they also would go to the gym together and pretty much hang out all the time. So I know this guy really, really well. When my husband would invite him over, I never got the feeling that he liked me. I mean, sure, sometimes I caught him staring at me, but I'm beautiful, so I understand. So after my husband passed, he started coming over as in, I want to take care of you, and we would just kind of cry together. I took this as his way of trying to help my husband, you know, so I just thought he was being really sweet. But exactly 1 month after my husband passed away, he started asking me weird questions. Number 1, do you want to start dating again? Number 2, don't you feel lonely at night? Number 3, you're still so young and beautiful. You need to give yourself a chance with someone else. Mind you, I'm still grieving. To these questions, I would usually say no. Obviously, I mean, why would I even be thinking about those things? I didn't put too much mind to the questions, but a few days later, he came over after he had been at a bar. As soon as I opened the door to him, he said, "Can I kiss you?" And then he did without me saying yes. Part 2. Story time about how my dead husband's best friend won't leave me alone. Disclaimers, not my story time. Send me on Instagram. As soon as I opened the door, he asked me if he could kiss me, and I didn't say anything. And he grabbed me and just started kissing me. Of course, I pushed him away and told him that he needed to leave. That's when he said, "But you didn't say no." I told him I didn't say anything because I was shocked he would even ask me that. That's when he walked into the house without me inviting him, went straight to the fridge and opened up a beer. Then he starts yelling at me for giving him mixed signals. He says that since my husband died, all I've been doing is flirting with him. Since when is grieving flirting? I told him that he was completely wrong and that he needed to leave again. Then he said, "No, I'm not leaving here until you tell me the truth." That I was secretly in love with him and that I actually wanted to be with him. No, this wasn't funny to me at all. He was slurring his words and barely could stand up. I knew my kids were upstairs, so all I wanted to do was get him out of the house. That's when I grabbed my phone and started texting one of my other husband's best friends. I texted him 911, please come to our house now. He responded right away saying, "I'm coming over." After another minute of this guy ranting at me, I told him I was sorry for giving him mixed signals and that was never my intention, blah, blah, blah. Then he asked me out on a date. He said that he wanted to take me out and show me a good time. I said no, and I asked him to leave again, but he wouldn't. Finally, someone knocks on the door. Part 3 is story time about how my dead husband's best friend won't leave me alone. Disclaimers, not my story time. Send me on Instagram. That's when he asked me out on a date and started walking closer to me. Finally, someone knocked on the door, and it was my other husband's friend who I texted to come help me. I ran over to the door quickly and I opened it. That's when my husband's best friend, who was drunk in my house asking me out on a date, forcing me to kiss him, tells the other guy that he needs to leave. So I asked the other friend if he could just take this guy home. He said, yeah, of course. And he told him, "You're drunk. I'm going to take you home now." They left together without incident and I was really relieved. But after that, I knew to watch my back now. So here's what happened. He started texting me every now and then asking me if I wanted to go to dinner. And I would not even respond to him. And after that, he started showing up to different places I was at. For example, I go to Pilates classes 5 times a week. This place is near my house. And one day he just showed up trying to take a class. As soon as I saw him, I told the instructor and they kicked him out. That's when he came back and said that he did nothing wrong and that he deserved to be in the class too. He even paid the year up front. So they had no choice but to let him in. Instead, I left. Then he followed me outside to the parking lot and told me that I needed to relax. Said it's not like I'm following you, which he clearly was. I got in my car and left. That very same night, he sent me a message apologizing for acting crazy. Then he told me that all he wanted was just to be close to me and the kids. By the way, my kids really do love him. They ask about him all the time since he stopped coming over, and I don't even know what to tell them. After a few weeks of him not acting crazy, he asked me if he could come over and I said yes. Decided to invite all my husband's friends and we had a nice dinner. But again, this guy asked me out. I said no, but my best friend thinks I should give him a shot. He's good looking and rich. What do you guys think?
Just invented a new overlining lip hack. Start by pushing out your lips to the duck position. You know what I'm talking about. And start drawing over the edge of the lip. We're trying to make them look juicy and plump. Perfect the shape exactly how you want it and top up with some lip gloss. Smack that shit together and voila. Grand reveal, please. Bitch, this look good. I'm never overlining my lips any other way. I need to trademark this. I love you guys. Bye.
Ready with me for my best friend's wedding and story time about how I got fired from a job that she got me because a guy accused me of sexually assaulting him. I guess attempted sexual assault is more like it. Obviously, my beautiful best friend is getting married today. It was actually this past weekend, but I showed up with my hair really clean. Serena and I met when we studied at the same conservatory, Stella Adler Studio of Acting in New York City. This is also where I met my husband, so we've known each other for 10 years. Guys, this was back in 2012. By the way, I completely changed my hairstyle because Serena gave me a gift basket, and in the gift basket, there was this beautiful bow on it. So I decided I needed to incorporate the bow into my hair. I went
went ahead and started straightening my hair, which I had washed in the morning. Look how shiny my hair looks. Shout out to my K18 shampoo for that. Back to the story. After we graduated from school, I actually did book a few roles. I got the role of playing the girlfriend of Harvey Keitel and the comedian and some other stuff. Then I got married and then I went back to New York and I had no job. Serena at the time was working for a company called S3, like the letter S and the number 3. I'm done hiding from these people, so I am calling them out. Oh, I also started curling the ends of my hair, which unfortunately the curls did not stay, but it still looked pretty. So Serena got me the job, and let me tell you, there were only men working at this office with the exception of one other woman, and Serena and me. So you can imagine it was a very misogynistic place to work at. Men would stare at us like we were Martians, but mostly because they were looking at our bodies. How beautiful does my hair look? Go to part 2. Ready with me for my bestie's wedding, plus story time about how she got me a job that I was fired from for supposedly offering a guy a BJ. Like I said in part 1, working here was weird because there were only men, except for one other woman, Serena and me. Serena's my best friend, by the way, who is getting married today. By the way, this whole filming of this process was super uncomfortable because I didn't have a really good setup, but I did my best. By the way, I tried a new foundation, the Hourglass one, and it was phenomenal. Beautiful. I ended up getting sat next to this one guy. He was the youngest guy in the office, good looking, he was really funny. Everyone told me that as soon as I started working there, this guy completely changed. He was funny, he was talking, he was making jokes. He literally looked happy at the job. Before I showed up, apparently he was not very much like that. Him and I would have really cool conversations. We would talk about movies and all that. But obviously, we're at work, so it was nothing weird. Eventually, we started talking about the women that he dated, which I would give him advice and whatever. It was nothing deep. But then one day, the manager, Gabe, he emails me and tells me that I don't need to show up for work. You guys, I almost pooped my pants. I had a bad feeling. I asked him why, and he said, oh, we're just not that busy today. And the following day, he asked me not to show up again. He just didn't have the balls to fire me. Part 2 is up. Stay with me for my bestie's wedding, plus story time about how I got fired from a job for supposedly sexually assaulting somebody, or attempted. Because my manager at this job called S3 did not have the balls to fire me, he actually asked Serena, my best friend, the girl who is getting married today, who I am getting ready for, he asked her to fire me. She asked me to meet her at the park, and as soon as I get there, she starts to cry. So I start to cry. Then she tells me that they fired me. And guess what? They didn't even give her a reason. I go home, I'm depressed for the next 2 weeks, I'm crying every single day. But Serena got to investigating. 2 months later, she calls me while I'm in Egypt. She tells me the truth. Apparently, the guy that I sat next to every single day at this job, by the way, his name is Justin, he invented this whole lie about how I would accost him in the kitchen at work, I would offer myself to him, and on several occasions I asked him if he wanted a BJ at work. In reality, this guy was so in love with me that he couldn't sit next to me at work every day. So he figured the best thing to do to get rid of me was to invent a lie to get me fired. By the way, the day that I got fired, I texted him and he felt so bad. He even offered me money, you guys. All the while, he was the one that got me fired. Should I sue these people? This is the final makeup look for the wedding. I love you guys. Bye.
My husband got my best friend pregnant and now is forcing me to raise the child. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. About a year ago, I started getting suspicious that my husband was having an affair. So naturally, I started investigating. I went through his phone when he was asleep, but I didn't find anything. That's when I realized that I needed to start following him. And when I did is when I found out who he was cheating on me with. Turns out, it was my best friend. My best friend had just gotten a divorce with her husband at the time. And she told me that she was trying to have fun with as many men as she possibly could. I just never thought it would occur to her to sleep with my husband. For a full week, I followed my husband and he would see my best friend every single day. Sometimes they would meet up at her house since her husband left her the house. Sometimes they would end up at cheap motels. Of course, I started taking pictures on my iPhone to keep track of everything in case I needed to get a divorce. Come to find out, she was pregnant with twins. Part 2 is up. My husband got my best friend pregnant and is now forcing me to raise the kids. Disclaimer, is not my story time. After realizing that my husband was cheating on me with my best friend, I confronted him and her together. I pretended I was having a little dinner party and I invited her over. Really did make a nice dinner though. They did not suspect a thing. Comes into the house and gives me a big hug. Right then and there, I hand her my phone so that she could see all of the pictures I took of her and my husband making out outside of motels. Then she looks at my husband and says, "What did you say?" What did you say? He didn't even bother to look me in the face. Handed me back my phone and simply left the house. Then I'm left alone with my husband. Start confronting him and then he tells me that he made a mistake and that he was just bored with our relationship and that he loved me. He manipulated me so much that night that I ended up forgiving him. He promised he would never see my best friend again. And guess what? My bestie kept looking for my husband. One night she came over and told me that she needed to see him. I did not let her into the house and she started yelling. That's when she finally says, "I'm pregnant with twins." Apparently she had been pregnant for 3 months and didn't tell anybody. And my husband was happy about it. That's when he asked me if I would be willing to raise the kids. Part 3 is up. My husband got my best friend pregnant and is now forcing me to raise the kids. Disclaimer, is not my story time. After she told us that she was 3 months pregnant, my husband was so happy. He told her that he would take care of everything and not to worry about the medical bills. As soon as my best friend left our house, my husband turns to me and says, "You and I are gonna raise those kids without her." That's when I said he was crazy. I was not about to raise the kid that he had with my best friend. That's when he said that if I didn't, he would divorce me and marry my best friend. But I do have to say, I am still madly in love with my husband. We've only been together for 3 years. He was my dream man when we got married and he still kind of is my dream man, even though he did cheat on me with my best friend. When he threatened me with that, I
said okay. The next 6 months, my best friend moved into our house while she was pregnant. My husband and I served her hand and foot, and in some weird way, my best friend and I became best friends again, even though she was having my husband's babies. Also turns out that she was having twins. During the pregnancy, my husband told her that she could stay to live with us and we could all raise the kids together. To be honest, I didn't mind the idea. My husband's real plan was to try to get rid of her, so that we could move away and she wouldn't be able to find us. But my best friend was looking forward to having her babies. Once she gave birth, my husband decided to bring her back to our house with the babies. Exactly a week later, he kicked her out of our house, and he offered her $50,000 to give the babies to us. And she agreed. So now I'm stuck raising the twins by myself. My husband is always away for work. My best friend never even comes around to look at her kids. My husband told me that he doesn't think we should have our own kids. He also promised he wouldn't cheat again, but I don't know what to believe. What should I do?
Story time about how I was voted the ugliest girl in high school. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, I sent me on Instagram. Growing up, I was really awkward. My parents always used to call me the ugly duckling, but my dad told me not to worry, that when I would grow up, I would become beautiful. Honestly, this really stuck to my head, and I am very beautiful now. I used to have braces, acne. My hair has always been curly, but I didn't know how to treat it back then. My mom had really straight hair, so she had no idea how to do my hair either. And this was the toughest thing for me. I would show up to school with knots in my hair because I didn't even know how to brush it. Eventually, my mom did start taking better care of my hair, which really helped. I also didn't know how to dress for my body. I wore big hoodies, big t-shirts, while the other girls in my high school dressed for their body type. I honestly just had no clue. I did get bullied, but mostly by boys. I think the girls probably just felt bad for me, so I never really had problems with other girls. A group of boys would always bother me. One of them even asked me out, pretending that he wanted to go out with me. Of course I said yes because I actually believed him. He asked me to go to the movies, and when I showed up, he wasn't there. I decided to go watch the movie anyway, but the next day in school, I couldn't hear the end of it. To my face, this guy called me stupid. A few days later, they made a list of the ugliest girls. Part 2 is story time about how I was voted the ugliest girl in high school. Disclaimer, is not my story time, I sent me on Instagram. That's when the boys came out with the list of the ugliest girls in high school. What they did was pass around some flyers with all the names on it, and then they had people write the number 1 ugliest girl on the list. As soon as I saw my name on the list, I wanted to die. I pretended I was sick and went home. There was this one girl who actually stood up for me and the rest of the girls, and she was actually one of the prettiest girls in the entire school. She told everyone to knock it off, but nobody listened to her. Instead, the boys added her to the list as well, but there was no way that she was going to get voted number 1. I would show up every day to school that week wishing that I was dead. Finally, on Friday, they came out with the winner. And of course, everyone picked me. I was completely mortified, but I actually started laughing when I saw the list. It was like the stress from the entire week had finally accumulated, and my reaction was to just laugh. While they were all hoping that I was just going to break down and cry, I started to laugh in their faces. The teacher asked me what was wrong and I showed her the list. She ran over to the principal's office and everything became way too dramatic for me. So I literally decided to run away from school. When I got home, I told my parents everything. Part 3 is up. About how I was voted the ugliest girl in high school. Disclaimer, is not my story time, sent me on Instagram. When I got home and told my parents what happened, my dad actually started to cry. He actually did feel really bad for me. They sat me down and told me that looks weren't everything. That's when my dad told me again that I would grow out of this awkward phase. Then they decided to take me shopping to the mall. We went into this really cute clothing store that I had always wanted to go to but never had the courage to, and they actually bought me a full wardrobe. After that, that's when my mom took me to a salon and they actually did my hair. They gave me a whole hair care routine, which I had never even heard of before, and I even went and got some Noxzema, which actually the Noxzema really worked for my acne. So when I got back to school, I felt like a different person, but not really because I was still me. The principal had gone out of her way to make all the boys pay, but really they only got suspension and didn't go to school for a week. The rest of high school was actually not that bad. I did look a lot better. 5 years later, I'm absolutely gorgeous. And guess what? One of the boys who bullied me actually slipped into my DMs last week. What should I say? Story time about how I stole my sister's boyfriend and don't regret it. Disclaimer, is not my story time, sent me on Instagram. When I walked in on my boyfriend and my sister hugging, I knew I had to do something. I went straight to my parents and told them what she was doing. My dad pulled her into her room and talked to her, but she totally denied everything. She said that she was not flirting with my boyfriend, but we all knew that was a lie. Even my boyfriend was honest with me and told me that she had been flirting with him openly. That's when my boyfriend told me he didn't even want to come over to our house because my sister made him that uncomfortable. And when I told my parents this, they felt so embarrassed. They called my boyfriend and personally apologized to him. He was actually so sweet though. He would come visit me to my house and we would just chill out in his car while my sister was inside watching us through the window. Yeah, she was crazy. He and I eventually broke up because he went off to live in another country. And guess what? My sister said that she knew he never loved me and that's why he left me. She was being so mean at the time. A few years later, she started dating someone. Of course, at the time, it never occurred to me to even flirt with him or act the way that she did with my boyfriend. You see, I'm above all that. But as soon as I got a new boyfriend, she would start flirting with him. him, and she had no shame about it. This became a running problem in my family. My parents would ask her to leave me alone and my boyfriends, and she would say that she did. But no, she didn't. Oh yeah, and her boyfriend broke up with her because he noticed that she would flirt with a lot of guys. Apparently, she did it even in front of him. So when she finally got a new boyfriend, I decided that I was gonna do the same thing to her. I started flirting with her boyfriend a little. Not a lot, but I definitely made sure to tell him I thought he was attractive. After a few weeks, he started saying things back to me, and I knew that it was working. I never did it in front of my sisters and my parents because I didn't want them to get mad at me. So instead, I got her boyfriend to basically fall in love with me. I already knew everything about him because my sister would tell me, so I just started telling him I liked the same things he did. It got to the point where one day he kissed me and I didn't tell my parents. I made sure to get his hopes up. Part 3 is up.
Once I got my sister's boyfriend to fall in love with me, her life turned to misery. No, I didn't regret it. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Was sending me on Instagram. One day I went up to my sister and told her that her boyfriend had kissed me. First she thought I was making it up to make her jealous. Told me I could never compete with her and that she was the more beautiful sister out of the two of us. Which is wrong. So I handed her my phone so that she could see all the messages that her boyfriend and I had been sending each other. And that's when she lost it. She started wailing on me. She started slapping and kicking me. My parents ran into her room and asked her what was wrong. I told my parents that I treated my sister the way she treated me. She would always go after my boyfriends, flirt with them, and try to get them to break up with me. Of course, my parents didn't agree with me, so they were really angry. They separated us, but my sister went crazy. She called her boyfriend and told him to come over. Obviously, he didn't know that she already knew at the time. And when he came over, she started beating him up. She grabbed a pan from the kitchen and started swinging at him. She actually ended up giving him a concussion. After that, she begged for his forgiveness, but he still broke up with her. At the end of the day, he ended up leaving her. She was so stupid for begging him to stay with her. Her boyfriend even asked me if we could be together, and I told him no. I told him that the whole time I had just been playing him just to get back at my sister, which I know is so cruel, but he deserved it. After that, my sister and I decided to make peace. She told me that she wouldn't mess with my boyfriends anymore and that she would stop being evil. But after a month of having my new boyfriend, I found her flirting with him too. I told her if she didn't stop that I would make her life miserable once again. I'm pretty sure she has a boyfriend, but she doesn't want to tell my family. Cause she knows that I'll go after him and I would probably end up making him fall in love with me too. But at this point, I just don't know what to do. What should I do? She's so evil and I want to make her life miserable. Bye. Story time about how I kissed every teacher I ever had a crush on and never got caught. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Was sending me on Instagram. Growing up, I was a spoiled brat. My parents gave me literally everything I ever wanted. For my 15th birthday, I told my dad that if he didn't get me a BMW, I would run away. So on my 15th birthday, I got the BMW. My parents never said no to anything. One time I told my parents I wanted to have a party at my house and they said no. I threw a tantrum and started to cry. My dad pulled out his credit card and told me to stop crying and I could go buy whatever I wanted. And I pretty much maxed out his card. He did punish me for a month, but all he really took away was the TV. As you can see, I was completely entitled. And yes, looking back, I would love to punch myself. I was a complete brat. When I got into high school, I went boy crazy. My parents told me they did not want me having boyfriends, but of course, I put up a fight. They had no choice but to let me have boyfriends. I would bring them over to my house all the time, and I would always take them up to my room and lock our door. My dad told me one time to open the door, and I wouldn't, so he just left me. Eventually, I got bored with all my boyfriends, so I would just break up with them. But one day, this new high school teacher comes in. We made eye contact for about 5 seconds. I was obsessed. Follow for part 2. Story time about how I kissed every high school teacher I had a crush on and never got caught. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. After we locked eyes for about 5 seconds, he looked away. But I was totally obsessed. He was like the most perfect guy I'd ever seen. And the first thing I did was go to his classroom. I knocked on the door and as soon as he saw me, he smiled and said, "Come in." We talked for about 2 minutes and he told me that he was only substituting. So I knew I needed to make my move really quick. Fortunately, I was not taking the classes that he was substituting, but I had to find a way to get close to him. So I started watching everything that he did. My school had a big outdoors area and there were lots of tables around. And I noticed that he would go behind the library to eat his lunch. So I started going behind the library to eat my lunch. I decided to get there before he did so that it would be a coincidence. As soon as he saw me, he waved, but he sat at another table. So I grabbed my food and went over to sit with him. That's when I started asking him if he had a girlfriend. He got super red. This guy was blushing. And I knew right away that he probably had a crush on me. He basically didn't give me a yes or no about the girlfriend, but I didn't care. But I didn't want to make my move right away. Instead, for the next 3 days, I sat with him at lunch. Finally, he asked me, "Don't you have friends?" And I said yes, but they're all annoying. That's when I leaned in for the kiss. And no, he did not pull away. The kiss lasted for about 10 seconds. As soon as we pull away, he starts looking around to see if anybody saw. And he told me that I need to find someone my own age. By the way, he was 24, I was 17. Next day at lunch, I asked him if he wanted to go to my car. And we ended up kissing 3 more times that day. That's when he asked me for my phone number. Follow for part 3.